Hey guys, Greg here. It's the Vinyl Rundown, and it's that time again for Record Store Day coming up April 23rd this year. And this year's Record Store Day promises to be back to normal. Last year, under the COVID, we had all kinds of strange mini record store days. Today, they're doing it the old way, the big one in April, and then probably another one on Black Friday on after Thanksgiving. Big list this year, over 300 records. And this video is really just about the jazz records. I've gone through the entire list, something like 17, 18, 19 jazz records. I've gone through the list and sorted out whatever 18, 19 jazz records. And I've also made that list available to you guys, my subscribers. The link to that sorted list will be in the show notes below the video. Let's go right to that list and you can see what I'm talking about. I'm going to start with two of the biggest records here, not necessarily in order, but let's start with this one. Albert Ayler, the great jazz, avant-garde jazz and free jazz saxophonist. So he died in 1970. There's really not a lot of his material available. There's a lot of used stuff, but there really aren't too many new pressings that you're going to easily find. So it's great to find some of his stuff available now. This is a massive 5-disc set, the complete ORTF Foundation. 5 discs put out by the Elemental label, and unfortunately only 600 copies. So I think those are going to go really fast, and unfortunately we'll probably see those on the secondary market. So some of these were previously released as a volume 1, 2, 3, 4. So you may be able to pick up some of those individually, but not easy to get. So this is a great release on Elemental, and as always, they do a great job of packaging and photography, and Zev Feldman is involved. Kevin Gray, Coherent Audio. A lot of music, as you can see, all of these tunes. What I think is interesting about this is you've got interviews by people like Sonny Rollins and Archie Shepp and so forth. Albert Ayler, Revelations, the complete recordings of etc. 1970. So that I think is one of the top releases of Record Store Day this year. Another record that I think is one of the most special, noteworthy records coming out on jazz this year is Max Roach, We Insist, the Freedom Now Suite. This is really a civil rights proclamation, if you will. I want to say 61, but really a suite of songs dedicated to promoting civil rights and the Black movement, featuring Coleman Hawkins, which seems like a little bit of an unusual choice since he was considered from the old school. But Max Roach is too. I mean, he played with Charlie Parker, but Max Roach going forward really dedicated a lot of his music to the Black Civil Rights Movement. So this is on the Candide label. I think you pronounce it Candide, not Candid. They didn't last too long. They put out some noteworthy releases, but eventually they ended up closing up shop and selling the entire label. They were under another label called Cadence, but I think it's kind of ironic that this entire label, the rights to this whole discography on Candid, ended up being owned by none other than Mr. Hip himself, Andy Williams. That's right. Mr. Andy Williams ended up owning this entire catalog. So this is 2,000 pieces. It's sort of a suite in the style of, they're mentioning Duke Ellington's Black, Brown, and Beige, a suite that sort of covers the history of African Americans in America from slavery days to emancipation to the civil rights struggles that we're having now. So very relevant record, and I think one of the more noteworthy releases. Oh, I would add, this record is available, unfortunately, through some of those what I call Euro trash labels like Wax Time. You can get them on eBay for probably 19, 20 bucks. Those are not authorized releases. I urge anyone watching this to not patronize those labels that are stealing from musicians. If you want to support African American civil rights, the last thing you want to do is steal their music, buy it from an unauthorized source, buy it from somebody who does not pay any royalties. The whole copyright thing with Europe is a whole other issue we can get into at some point in the future. Just because something is legal does not mean it's the right thing to do. So who's next? Oh, here's another huge release. Chet Baker. Chet Baker live in Paris. Another, just like Just like the Albert Ayler, this one is also recorded in France, 1983, 1984. So this is Chet Baker on the rebound. You know, Chet Baker had a brilliant career in the 50s, 60s. He went away, had drug problems, legal problems, couldn't get his life together. We weren't sure if he was ever going to return to music. Hurt his mouth, couldn't even play the trumpet for a while. So now this is part of his triumphant return. And of course, he was loved in Paris, in France, in Europe, much more so than maybe jazz musicians were being loved by Americans in the 80s, at least. So he found a very warm welcome playing in a Paris club in the 80s. Two different club dates captured in stereo. Liner notes by Ashley Kahn. I have a couple of his books. 2-record set. A lot of great tunes on here, both singing and playing by Chet Baker. And you know, Chet Baker died just a few years after that, 1988, and many people in my generation did not really know him at all until the movie Let's Get Lost came out, which documented the last few tough years of his life when he was coming back to the stage and still battling the demons that ultimately ended his life a little early. Actually, it's a 3-record set, another one by Elemental Music. Kevin Gray mastered at Coherent Audio. That's going to be a great and hard to get release also. Pepper Adams with the Tommy Banks Trio. Pepper Adams is really one of only 2 or 3 jazz saxophonists that's really well known while playing the baritone. The other one is Jerry Mulligan. Pepper Adams with the Tommy Banks Trio, recorded in Canada. Tommy Banks is this big shot Canadian band leader, orchestra leader, arranger. He actually became a politician in Canada. So this is a club date from, I want to say, 1972. Pepper Adams, again, is a musician that I don't think well enough known. He did some amazing stuff. He did stuff on Blue Note and with Donald Byrd. And the most famous Pepper Adams thing I think you need to be aware of if you're not is he played this amazing short riff on the song Moanin'. Not the other Moanin' with Art Blakey and Charles Mingus's Moanin' on the Blues and Roots album, one of the most famous baritone sax lines and solos of all time. So Pepper Adams, more or less a traditionalist. I don't think he got real avant-garde, so this is fairly traditional, but you know, all around good playing. All right, Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, In My Prime, on Tidal Reeves Music. Don't really know this record or this period very well. This is very late in Art Blakey's life, so in his prime. You could argue that it was past his prime, but Art Blakey played like it was in his prime his whole life. He had a long, wonderful career, and he recorded for over 20 labels. Most people just think of him as Blue Note, Blue Note, Blue Note, but he was with a lot of minor labels also. The liner notes written on this is extremely ridiculously long. This unique album, deluxe double 180 gram, 2,000 copies, OB strip, original artwork. This is with players that are not amongst Art Blakey's most well-known. I don't really think the cover's all that great either. But for the Art Blakey fans out there, if you like Blakey, which everybody does, I'm sure it's very nice. Dave Brubeck live in Vienna, 1967. Brubeck Editions, I guess that's a private label with the Brubeck family. 3,500 copies. First time released, 1967. Rare performance. The unusual thing about this record is Paul Desmond wasn't there. He missed the plane. So it was one of the only times you're ever going to hear Dave Brubeck as a trio without the great Paul Desmond on that smooth saxophone. Check that out if you're a Brubeck fan. That could be very interesting. Larry Coryell, fusion-y guitar player, the Culture Factory label. Not familiar with him at all. 2,000 copies. A must-have album. Is it a must-have? I don't know. Not that familiar with this record or this period with Larry Coryell, one of the great fusion-y, very talented guitar players. Here's a big one. Miles Davis, Montreal. 1983. We're seeing a lot of records being recorded outside the United States in this period, and this is a period, 80s, 90s. Jazz might not have been that popular in the United States, but certainly super popular in places like Europe, Canada, etc. Miles Davis, 1983, What It Is, Montreal, on the Legacy label. By the way, this record will not be available on Record Store Day. It's going to be available later, June 18th, and I assume that is a supply chain issue, which is going to affect a few of these records. So If you're rushing out to get just this record, don't stand in line. It won't be there. So this is the period in Miles's life where I got to see him live. So I saw Miles in the mid 80s, and what I like about this period particularly is one of my all-time favorite musicians, John Scofield, plays guitar on here. And I think he is probably the most talented guitar player that Miles Davis has ever worked with. Scofield wrote and played on some of the tunes that Miles recorded on album in this period. You got Marcus Miller, of course. You've got Bill Evans on here, but it's not the piano player, it's the other guy, the young Bill Evans. Daryl Jones, Al Foster. This looks like it's a record that was available as more or less an unauthorized bootleg, and now it's available through an official Record Store Day release. All right, Bill Evans, another great release from Zev Feldman and the folks at Resonance Records, another 2 LP set. Bill Evans' Inner Spirit, 1979 in San Martin, Buenos Aires, Brazil. Looks like it's a lot of great Evans tunes, especially ones he was doing later in life, like the theme from MASH. Obviously didn't come about till the 70s. Turn Out the Stars, I love. Someday My Prince Will Come, Nardis, Stella by Starlight. Lots of classic, great Bill Evans stuff. And let's see who plays on here. Joe LaBarbera, local guy I saw play recently here in Los Angeles. Mark Johnson, amazing bass player who's still around, obviously. Mastered by Bernie Grunman. RTI right here in Camarillo down the street from me. This is the companion piece to another Bill Evans record. So let's pull that one up. So the folks at Resonance Records, Zev Feldman, 2 records. Again, it seems like every Record Store Day we get a Bill Evans from these guys. And I have about half of them, and they're all very nice. So this one is called Morning Glory, 1973, also from Buenos Aires. Aires, with Eddie Gomez and Marty Morell on bass. Typical set of Bill Evans' great tunes, Re-Person I Knew. You guys know that the name of that song is actually an anagram from Orrin Keepnews, one of Bill's favorite producers that he worked with. Morning Glory, Beautiful Love, one of my favorites. Waltz for Debbie, My Foolish Heart. A lot of great tunes on there. That one looks like another winner for the Bill Evans fans. Kenny Garrett, saxophone player. He just put out a major label release the last few months. Kenny Garrett, certainly a very good current saxophone player. 1,900 copies on the Mack Avenue label, live at the Iridium Club in New York City. Interesting, this has Pharoah Sanders, the great Pharoah Sanders. It's on colored vinyl, so very interesting. Released by Kenny Garrett. So that looks like it's a fairly new recording. I don't know what year it was done in, but Kenny Garrett, very nice. Who's next? Why do they do this to us? Vince Guaraldi, the great piano player that everybody knows from the Charlie Brown TV shows. This is just a 7-inch single, 2 songs. Vince Guaraldi Trio Baseball Theme on Kraft Recordings, 3,000 copies. Baseball Theme, Jazz Impressions of a Boy Named Charlie Brown. So it's really jazz impressions that Vince did of the show, not really from the original show. I'm not a real fan of 7-inch recordings for jazz. All right, here's an interesting recording. One of the few new recordings, Jazz Sabbath. Jazz Sabbath's second release, the Blacklight label, 4,000 copies, Jazz Sabbath Volume 2. Jazz Sabbath, if you don't know, is a jazz version, a jazz group that does Black Sabbath cover tunes. Cool tunes on here. Paranoid Snowblind, which is actually one of my very favorite Black Sabbath tunes. Sabracadabra. Okay, I'll let the cat out of the bag here. Jazz Sabbath is really Adam Wakeman, who is Rick Wakeman's son. And he is the brains behind Jazz Sabbath. And he's a well-established keyboard player and I think session player, played with Ozzy Osbourne, people like that. So I tried to get those guys to interview for my show, and they gave me some cockamamie excuse that they were tired that day, or they had to watch Netflix. I don't know. Maybe someday they'll come on the show. Okay, here's one. Calvin Keys. I just learned about Calvin Keys for the first time in the last 2 years, and I bought one of his records on the, is it the Black Jazz label or the Soul Jazz label? Tidal Waves Music, limited run of 1,000 copies. Calvin Keys is a legendary soul jazz funk guitar player, and he's played with a lot of people, but very interesting guitar player who I think deserves a little more. Yeah, here it is. It was on Black Jazz Records. Yeah, this is the one I have, Shawnee, 1971. Probably his most famous. Tidal Waves Music proudly presents the first ever vinyl reissue of Full Court Press, originally from 1985. So Calvin Keys, that is a good one for hard to find jazz. Okay, what's next? Here's a good one. Delvon Lamarr Organ Trio, Live in Loveland. This is on the Coal Mine Records label, and they're doing a great job. This is a new label run by the Cole brothers. Terry Cole, owner of Coal Mine Records. Delvon Lamarr Organ Trio, really interesting group, getting a lot of attention lately. 7,500 copies, and it's called Live in Loveland. Did I mention that? I'm not quite sure it's jazz. It's soul jazz, funk, pop, R&B, very old school, retro sound, 50s, 60s, Jimmy Smith organ vibe. Really a great player, a lot of fun. It's not quite jazzy enough for my mind to call it jazz because he doesn't like play through complex changes, and the tunes that he does are either old R&B and soul tunes or his own tunes. This is a record store day first because this is a recording of a live in-store appearance that they did on record store day at Plaid Room Records, which is Terry Cole's record store. So this is the first time a live in-store record store day performance turned up and became a record store day release. Kind of cool. And notice how the cover art harkens back to this looks like a CTI release from the 70s. Some of his previous records kind of look like they were modeled on Blue Note. So while I don't feel he's super jazzy, he's certainly paying homage to some great jazz people from the past. Wow, here comes a big one, another big one. Charles Mingus from Ronnie Scott's, the lost album from Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club in London. Also on Resonance Records, 3,000 copies, a 3 LP set. Huge fan of Mingus, and he's one of the biggest artists that you're going to see coming out with something on Record Store Day. Let's take a quick look at the notes here. You've got interviews. So anytime Resonance and Zev Feldman do something, they usually have interviews in the liner notes from big time people. So here we've got Fran Lebowitz, of all people, Eddie Gomez, Christian McBride, Bernie Grunman engineered, pressed by RTI. Let's see, this was recorded in 1972. A lot of great Mingus tunes here. Orange was the color of her dress. Fables of Fabu. How do you pronounce that? That again is a civil rights anthem. Charles Mingus recorded somewhat later in his career. That I think is going to be a popular and special record. Here's one I don't really know too well. Jazz Dispensary, Super Skunk. This is a compilation. Craft Recordings, 3,500 copies. Lots of different artists on here. Cannonball Adderley, Woody Herman, Gary Bartz, who played with Miles Davis in his later years. A compilation of good stuff available from Craft Recordings. Right. Moving on. Young-Holt Unlimited Orchestra, playing the music from Superfly. 2,000 copies, Liberation Hall Records. This is another one that will not be available on Record Store Day proper in April, but should be available in stores by June 18th. 1973 captures soul hits from the moments, Superfly, and classics capturing the blaxploitation film sounds and style of the times of the 70s. Oh, yeah, these two guys were from the Ramsey Lewis trio, by the way, Young and Holt. And last but not least is the great Art Pepper. And I may have forgotten this the first time around, so we're inserting that after the fact. Sorry, my brain's a little addled. I listen to a lot of free jazz. Art Pepper, this is actually one of the most sought after records and most talked about records of Record Store Day this year. Art Pepper meets the Rythm Section from 1957. And this is one of the few times in jazz history where the title of the record actually makes a lot of sense. Art Pepper meets not a Rythm Section, but the Rythm Section, and he meets them for the first time. The Rythm Section we're talking about is the great backup band for Miles Davis. The Miles Davis Quintet was huge in those days, and we had Red Garland on piano, Paul Chambers on bass, and Philly Joe Jones on drums. And they had made a bunch of great records for the Prestige label. And then they had just signed with Columbia and made the first big Miles Davis record with Columbia, which was around about midnight. This particular session is kind of unusual and kind of interesting for a couple of reasons. Art Pepper, one of the leading alto players, more a proponent of the West Coast cool jazz sound, but this is a little bit intimidating. First of all, Art Pepper says that he didn't know that his record company had arranged a session for him that day. So he wakes up and somebody says, "Hey, man, you better get over to the studio. You've got a session today." Unrehearsed, unprepared, he walks in, and who does he say? Possibly the greatest rhythm section of all time, or at least of that time. Like I said, Miles Davis's backup band, Red Garland, Paul Chambers, and Philly Joe Jones. So imagine how intimidating that would be. You show up for a session totally unprepared, and there's three giants of jazz there. We all know that performing under stress can be a little bit intimidating, but you can also rise to the occasion, take a little more risks, play a little more aggressively. And that's what we think happened because Art delivered a great session that is kind of famous for being one of his best, if not his very best record. So this Record Store Day release looks like it's done beautifully because it is mastered by the great Bernie Grunman from All Analog Original Tapes. This is in mono, and this is on a special 180-gram black vinyl, and it's got this special tip-on jacket if you like that processing. This one says from Crash Recordings is 6,000 records, which is huge. So for those of you thinking you're going to buy it and flip it, there's a lot of records going to be sold. So I don't know how scarce this record is, but it is sure to be popular, and I do have a copy on CD. Would love to see if I can get a copy at Record Store Day. Sorry again to Art Pepper. Sorry for missing your record first time around. That's it, guys. That's the whole list. That's the whole list, guys. Thanks for watching. Please click on the show notes below if you want to download this list. I'll clean it up a little bit and put it in order for you guys. And if you like it, do me a favor. Maybe you want to subscribe to my channel. Looking forward to a great Record Store Day, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.